Hello, guys, and welcome to Fiat Lux. Today on the show, we have Hari from Health Exchange. Welcome, Hari. How's it going?
Hey, it's going well. Great to be here, Yves.
Yeah, good to have you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think I want to start with something I heard you talk about that may be like a good way to get into the whole topic.
Mhm.
Um, I heard you say the other day in a Twitter space that I think it was 1 in 3 Americans have their healthcare data sold without their knowledge. Um, can you talk about this a little, and then maybe let's sort of like lead that into what Health Exchange is and why you're here? What's the issue here that Health Exchange is trying to solve?
Yeah. So you're actually kind of right. It's worse than it sounds. So it's 100 million Americans are part of a data set that's curated by one company. So the largest company in the United States for healthcare is United Healthcare Group. They own uh, this provider sort of services side called Optum. What Optum does, they essentially just buy out independent practices, and now they're huge. They're all over the country. And they're all these like small to mid to some of them are a little bit bigger, but usually like small to mid-sized practices across the country. And so 100 million Americans use one of these practices. And when they go in, they sign a form, and that form is like a HIPAA release form. It lets the doctor look at their information, request their information. But they also have a clause in there where they can use your data for research. And the way they do that is they like strip out your name. It's not like identifiable back to you, but it's data collected on you. And those call that, person X or token, I don't know, 543, whatever it is, right? Um, and they have this huge data set. You can actually look it up. All you have to look up is Optum EHR data set, and they claim to have 100 million Americans, and they actively sell that data to pharmaceutical companies. And the reason that's useful for pharma companies is it can be useful for things like figuring out how much of a population has a certain disease to go after that, like so market research type activity. It's also potentially useful for creating novel diagnostics. So just based on someone's data, can you predict whether they're going to have a heart attack or whether they're going to develop cancer, right? So you can build these like AI engines that are very valuable in the market as well. And then finally, it's actually really useful for detecting new biomarkers and new drug targets. And so the way that's done, say you have 100 healthy people and 100 people with that suffer from a heart attack, you analyze everything, all the differences about those two pools or those two populations. And you can figure out, hey, people with heart attacks had mutations in genes X, Y, and Z. They usually had a higher like protein X level or something like that, right? You can figure out what's going on in a disease population versus a healthy population. And then you can target your drug development specifically around that using that information. And maybe this is a good time to pause, but the reason why it's so valuable is because currently, like that's not how medicines are made. Medicines are, you come up with 2,000 or 20,000 targets in a machine, right? You test it, you do simulations, you come up with a couple hundred. You have your chemist synthesize it. You try it in mice, you try it in rats, and eventually, if it's safe enough, you try it in humans. And people talk about pharma trials, clinical trials, phase 1, 2, 3. I think the rate of a drug going all the way from phase 1 to actually hitting the market is less than 7%, right? So people like this is very random. Like the way medicines are created, like it's not the way you would think. It's more just like we're just trying stuff until it works. But I guess going back to the main point, because of that, data is very, very valuable. And companies know, and that 100 million Americans that have their data sold, that's just one company. The reality is it's probably closer to like 60-70% of Americans have had their data used at one point by one of these like data aggregation companies. And this is health data, it's protected data. But I just don't think people know about it or realize it. But it happens all the time.
Okay, and so I guess is part of the mission at Health Exchange, at least as a sort of side effect, is that to sort of change the way we think about health data ownership and access?
Yeah, a bit of both, actually. So we're trying to do two things at Health Exchange. We see the future of medicine really being data driven. There's a lot of money in it. And the reason why pharma's putting in money is that they think they're going to get more money on the back end, right? When they actually develop these drugs. We think that patients should be cut in, right? It's our data, it's our patient's data. There's no reason why they should participate in the financial upside that they help create, right? Like, so if I donate my data and based on my data, you created a new drug, well, I don't own that drug. You still did all the, work for it, all the research. I don't have any scientific expertise, but it seems fair that you should get some sort of compensation, right? Even if it's minor, it feels like it just feels fair. And at the end of the day, even if you look at US laws, it clearly states that patients do own their health data. If you ask anyone in a healthcare setting, they'll say that patients own their data. They're not going to say a pharma company owns my data or a hospital owns my data. It's I own my healthcare data. And so, yeah, that is like one of our sort of key tenets to even creating Health Exchange in the first place. But the other part is that, this data collection, it's going to happen. It's just the way it's going to work because that's how medicine is going to occur in the future. It's going to be more personalized and based on your information about your unique body, rather than this sort of randomized, sort of risk-adjusted approach to medicine. And so with Health Exchange, we found an opportunity where, we can fairly and ethically pay people and bring them along for the ride and clue them in onto what's happening while creating something that's like a product that's differentiated and something that we think can really help shape the future of medicine. So it's a bit of both, I guess, to answer your question.
Okay. So maybe could you explain just a little bit more about Health Exchange? Maybe just how is the model different? Because we just talked about obviously like data ownership and who owns that, and do they have the right to be compensated for the money that's made from their data? So what is Health Exchange kind of doing in order to sort of combat that, or what is Health Exchange solving for? How is it doing it?
Yeah, so we're doing a few things for that actually. So right now we're still in development. We haven't launched yet, but the first thing we're going to put out is a solution. Unfortunately, this is US only because the US has the data infrastructure for a patient to actually request and retrieve their own records in like a very cheap and effective way. However, our first product that we're going to put out it's going to be a free to use product for anyone who's living in the United States. It's a few identifying information to figure out who you are, and you are who you say you are. And then based on that information, it puts all your health data from any hospital you've been to in one location, right? And it's free to use. We don't use that data. We don't look at that data. It's just for, essentially it's for our patients to quickly access their data from anywhere. And that's actually kind of an issue because right now in the United States, in some places, data still gets faxed to you. That's quickly changing. But we think there needs to be easier access for the average consumer to just look at all their healthcare data in one place. Once we have that sort of created, then we're going to start essentially like an open beta where people can share their health data with us, and in return, we'll credit them some points on the platform. But the end goal is that we'll actually create a token. It'll likely be a security. But essentially, it has a hard cap and of about 1 billion tokens right now. We're still designing the tokenomics, and we're still open to feedback as well. But the idea is we distribute tokens to people sharing data with us, and we incentivize different types of data sets. So not just your clinical records, but if you have genetics or some sort of protein markers, like Fitbit activity, any sort of health data, we'll compensate you in our token. And the idea is we build a large data set of a bunch of people. Obviously, any data you give us, we will scrub and anonymize in the same way as the industry does. Except when we go make partnerships with pharmaceutical companies, or we create devices, or potentially we start working in clinical trials and try to create our own drugs, a portion of that money will be sort of put aside for our token holders and our users. Right. So you can think of us as almost like a pharma cooperative, right? It's a co-op in the sense that all our users get together and provide their data. And that's the differentiated offering that we provide to pharma companies, to institutions. And so we'll go to a pharma company and say, hey, we have, 50,000, 500,000 patients on our platform. We know you guys are running clinical trials, for example, and you want to recruit patients with, let's say psoriasis or eczema or signals of depression, maybe to try a new sort of therapy. We have patients on our platform pay us, and we'll advertise our clinical trials. Our patients can get on the clinical trials and get access to the latest medication. We get paid from the pharma company, so we can operate, and we take some of that payment and also distribute it to our users. So we're trying to create in the short term, and this is in the next 3 to 4 years, we're trying to create a platform where someone can go in and essentially get paid for the healthcare data, and then see if they can participate in clinical trials or other sort of research initiatives that pharma does. In the future, more in the 5 to 10 year range, we actually think we could potentially start creating and deploying AI on our platform. And so the way that would look like is, like I was saying earlier, with all this data, it's possible to create early diagnosis algorithms. And you don't need a blood test, you don't need anything. You probably just need to click a button, and it'll sort of scan all your data and then predict whether you're going to have a health event in the next 1 to 2 years. And so by joining our platform, the idea is you get paid, you get potentially offers for clinical trials, and you get this additional health value where your data is being scanned constantly, and it'll the machine will let you know if you're at high risk for something. And so if you're at high risk for something, you can go to the doctor, tell them you had this risk score, maybe give you a reason why. And that would change sort of the care algorithm or the way care is provided to a person, make it much more tailored, highlight who's at high risk for developing what, and hopefully catch some disease early. So I'll pause there. There's actually one more part of the platform way in the future, but we can talk about it. It's more about drug development. Yeah.
Cool. No, that was awesome. Because I'm really interested in the kind of AI stuff, and I also thought it was cool. You mentioned a Fitbit, or maybe other kinds of technology. So maybe glucose monitors. You can tap into things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's really interesting, and it's something I've advocated for myself for a while. It's we were talking before the podcast about how I got into this, and we're talking about disillusionment, and I guess I've sort of applied the same thing to the medical industry when I look at the technology that we have in our personal lives and kind of the lack of interconnectivity or networking between, not necessarily between the devices, but the way that we use the information that these devices can collect. It seems to me quite obvious with things like Fitbits and maybe IoT, other types of IoT devices, glucose monitors. There's a number of things. You've got Steppen now. I guess you could even include, sort of these high-tech pedometers, because they sleep. There's a lot of sleep apps and sleep things that that's obviously sleep's really important. So yeah, I really do like that idea, and I think it's quite an important one. I think that we are a little slow on the uptake. We're getting there. Obviously, you're trying to do something about it, which is really cool. But yeah, definitely need some improvement. We definitely need more people like yourself. People sort of into technology and kind of looking to the future and trying to bring that forth. Or bring the future forward, because that seems essentially like what you're doing, right? You've got this concept of a new way of reading the data and collecting the data and paying patients for their data, and just improving healthcare in general. So yeah, like you said, we could maybe talk about some of the drug development stuff a little bit later. I would like to. I just touched on a couple of different devices or types of devices that can gather information that could be useful. Are there any novel devices or things that collect information that you think looking forward into the future that will be useful or just interesting to use? What kind of other device, apart from the the heart rate monitor, is there any sort of esoteric devices that's really cool and cutting edge and that you're interested in?
Yeah, so I think we can start with what's in the market now and then what's more and more on the bleeding edge. But I I think like genomic sequencing is up there, and there's different types of genomic sequencing, right? There's the stuff that 23andMe does, which is basically it it just tells you at a point like your entire genome. But you can also get it only looks at like certain parts of it. You get whole genome sequencing, which is like sequence absolutely everything in your DNA. You can start measuring RNA, and I guess for viewers, just in general, going back to some high school biology, right? There's three main analyte types that biochemists tend to look at: it's DNA, RNA, and protein. DNA is just the genetics; it's the building blocks, it's the blueprint. RNA is sort of like a messenger, and then proteins are the actual machines that run in your cells. Like they're tiny little machines that make your cells alive, right? They pretty much do all the activity inside your cells. And so we can measure the first two, DNA and RNA, with decent fidelity. Much like DNA is more stable, so that's easier to sequence. RNA a bit less so, but we've started to create some methods. But where we don't have that much information is around proteins. So in just a single cell, there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of proteins, probably, but definitely at least a few thousand proteins that are active and expressed. And in even the most leading institutions, like your Harvards or your MITs of the world, at a single sort of experiment, I don't think people can measure more than 70, 80 proteins. And there's thousands up there. So it begs the question, like, what do we really know about the human body? Not much. We know what proteins should be there, but we don't actually have those measurements because we can't measure that at scale. And so some of the interesting companies that are they're not looking at proteins, but there are a whole host of startups that are trying to like sort of map the proteome, right? So it's like how in the early 2000s people were trying to map the genome, trying to figure out like what genes would like map the human genome, trying to figure out what genes cause what, et cetera. Now people are trying to do that at the protein level, and I think there's a lot of companies trying to do that now. I don't think any of them have like been successful but it's a growing sort of place of interest. The other place that has sort of blown up recently is this idea of like single cell analysis. So previously, the way even the way genome sequencing is done, like you take a bunch of cells, blend them together, and then you get a lot of DNA, and you sort of computationally recreate it on the back end. But nowadays, people are able to like isolate a single cell and then map out within that cell what's being expressed, or so like what genes are being turned on, turned off at like a very high fidelity. But again, this is like early days still. It's really expensive to run those experiments. It's not being done very sort of in a widespread fashion. But companies like 10x Genomics, for example, it's a publicly traded companies. They do exactly that sort of single cell analysis. That's where a lot of the activity right now is taking place, like the cutting edge stuff.
Okay. Well, I like that you touched on the kind of DNA stuff. And now I'm wondering, because you talked about like in the future we can sort of that we can put in place sort of preventative, not measures, but I guess like warnings, right? Like you're saying, like they'll analyze the data and you'll put them through these algorithms, and then maybe when the joint health exchange, they're under the threshold or whatever, but then blood pressure goes higher than it should do, and they get whatever red alert, and so I'm wondering if you've ever thought about diets and how you can use this DNA sequencing to impact people in that way, because there are certain people have certain tolerances, certain intolerances. So people have allergies. Also, people, there's all sorts of like nuances to how people's bodies kind of interact with food, how they digest food, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, because you touched on the DNA thing. Have you ever thought about, like, even if it's just in the future, if it's like in the 10-year, 5-year plan, have you thought much about how you could maybe like help people with diets or anything like that?
Yeah, so like this is one of those things where like everyone has their own unique biology and then everyone has its own special biology, but it's not that unique, right? Like in the sense that if if you exist, there's probably like a few hundred people that are like
Mhm.
very, very similar to you, close enough that it's like effectively it's the same biology or like very, very similar biology, right? And so what we could do if we have again, this all comes back to the data that or the information that we have that allows us to make these sort of arguments. But if we had enough data that these 100 people, because of their genetics, because of the information we have on them, they do worse eating rice, right? They're better off eating breads, for example. It's just random, right? And but for these people, they are best off just being carnivores, or these people are best off being vegans, right? Like that could be possible that like over time, different sets or groups of people have different mutations, and that because of that, certain foods or certain medications, definitely, but definitely certain foods as well, could have different effects on their body, right? And so this comes back to the idea of like, and everything we're talking about here is it's called precision medicine, and that idea is exactly what it sounds right. Like rather than having this like everybody eat against the food pyramid or whatever, right? It's more like, hey, like this person needs this because of their unique biology. Let's get them more, I don't know, bread, bananas, whatever they need.
Yeah, no, that's and you brought up a I suppose important point, or an interesting point even. It like you said, it's about the data, and it's really interesting to think of all the kind of things like custom or tailored diets. I mean, even things like when you look at and again, maybe this is way far in like very far in the future. I don't know. You might know better than I do. Things like stress reduction. So, as far as I'm aware, there is something called epigenetics, and you can kind of like map out whether people have a um, kind of like a heightened intolerance or like heightened propensity to come under stress because of maybe things that have been passed on for generations. Maybe again, this is sort of like I'm not an expert on this, but there's I've heard of at least the people have theorized or hypothesized um, that maybe stress can be generational. So you have things like people who are in war torn countries or whatever. So maybe if your grandma was in World War II, you might actually have genes or turned on that enable you to deal with stress better, or it could be even worse. Like maybe if you traumatize in a certain way, or your uh, grandfather, grandmother, your mother, your father, etc. Maybe if they had something happen to them that was maybe traumatic, some kind of environmental stressor, and that activate these genes. There's just so many possibilities. Like you say, it's the data that's crucial. And once you get the data, then you can start to map these patterns out, and then you can create all sorts of products and services and things from the data. So yeah, I really like that idea, and it's data is powerful, and I guess that's why it also makes a lot of money. It's sort of coming back to the point of health exchange. Not that the point isn't to make money, but that you're seeing this thing of like the data is valuable, and people are taking advantage of people in a sense. So people are being taken advantage of, and so they should be, reimbursed for what value is theirs, essentially, that they're just giving away and they don't even realize. Um, so just to take sort of a right turn here, we've talked about all of the things that we can do, that things that are possible in the future. What maybe problems or even shortcomings do you think that decentralized health care data systems have? Like what maybe even just problems you've run into, things like clashing against the FDA, or even maybe sometimes blockchains aren't good for every purpose, or like sometimes it's better to have certain aspects so it's centralized. So what kind of issues have you run into, or what issues do you foresee?
Yeah, so the main question we get is, are we putting health data on chain, right? I think that's something that comes up a lot, and the answer is no, right? And it's no for a few reasons, but primarily there are certain regulations, at least in the United States, about how you can store personal health data, and it's written into the regulation that you have to store it on like a dedicated machine. And if you look at something like the IPFS, right, like that whole protocol for Filecoin, for example, you're essentially like you're using a bunch of partitioned hard drives of potentially unsecured machines. And so just from a regulatory perspective, like some of those issues do creep up, right? I think the secondary thing is like centralization versus decentralization and the implications on value, right? So let's say there's a totally decentralized health data market, right, where everyone puts up, and I think that's like a utopian sort of view on it. It's like very crypto native, and that's what people have tried before. Because the idea we're talking about, it's being tried in like multiple sort of iterations, different flavors on it. But the way it's been tried before is in that way. Let's create a marketplace. People come in every time your data gets sold or your data gets used, you get paid, right? It deposits in your account before your data even goes out, and there's like a sort of cryptographic proof method to figure out that your data is the one that we need, right? And it's a beautiful system, but then when you think about the reality of a system like that, it's like everyone's gonna get paid like 20 cents maybe, like every time someone requests your data, but then you have to go onto the platform and click yes every time in a timely manner for like, I don't know, 10 cents, 20 cents, whatever that number is. It's too low. It's the payment does not sort of incentivize you to do much. And the reason for that is when you have all this data that anyone can use, it's a commodity, right? And commodities in a market, they get pushed down. The price goes down. Where's the value in this? The real value is in insight generation and asset generation. So what's the information we can pull out from the data set that's useful to a pharma company? That's very, very valuable to a pharma company. What drugs can we generate? I mean, people know how much drugs cost, right? Everyone knows how much pharma makes. And so to really capture value, right? Like, what do you have to give up? You have to give up decentralization. Like that's actually what it is, right? So if you had a centralized entity actually using all this data, brokering deals on your behalf, right? You get more leverage, you get more negotiating power, right? And as a result, you can generate more revenues. And if you're sharing that revenues, the average person also gets paid more, right? And it's for less work, right? Because now they don't have to come in and click every time. They're just sort of delegating responsibility to that central authority. Of course, centralization, I mean, everyone in the crypto space knows, comes with its own risks, right? The way we tried to sort of make the argument that, we can be centralized is, we're based in the United States. We comply with the United States laws. There actually is recourse against our company. Like if you don't like what we did, or if you think what we did is illegal according to US law, you can sue us, right? And so in that sense, we're a little bit like a traditional company, but we're using the blockchain. And specifically, the reason we want to use the blockchain is because we're using it as almost like a incentive layer, right? So we're using it as a payments network where we can design the nature of the token to be fair and to reflect future value, not just like cash value today.
Okay. You mentioned IPFS there. This is just a little random little factoid. Did you know, and I might be wrong about this, so I might make a fool of myself here, but apparently IPFS was originally, the concept was made for DeSci. It was meant to be used for science, apparently. I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't know that. Obviously, it has many uses today, but I did see like a talk, one of the ETH conferences, and the person that founded IPFS was talking about how originally it was actually meant to be used for science, which I thought was really cool. And just to go back to speak to what you just said. I think that was a good explanation, and I think that's definitely necessary to understand the nuances and the reasons why centralized platforms or centralized databases versus decentralized. Why sometimes it's not always not everything fits into the decentralized model. Not everything works efficiently. it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. And I think most like reasonable people would agree with that. So I'm kind of glad you covered that, because I imagine you probably, like you said, you'd had a lot of questions about that, and it is something that especially diehard crypto people that they might be like skeptical of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's, and also this is interesting because, a lot of the people who really started crypto, I think they had to be like libertarian or anarchists, right? To really buy into that idea. Like the first movers, like, I think we're very much bought into that idea. And, in those communities, there's this idea that, um, like, or there's a misconception that all monopolies are due to government pressure or regulation, right? So, and that is true. Like you see a lot of like anti-competitive behavior arise in like monopolies, and they use the government as like a weapon, as a club to say like no more competition, like make it harder for a new entrant to join, et cetera, et cetera. However, like that is true and that does happen. But on the flip side, there's also plenty of natural monopolies, right? So if you let a market go unchecked, like absolutely no regulation whatsoever, some markets tend to monopolizations, right? Like they just go that way
I mean,
naturally.
just look at Bitcoin, right? Like
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
natural, that arose naturally, and it's obviously the dominant cryptocurrency by a mile,
Exactly.
and government had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, and I mean it's not just in that space. It can be like in any market, anytime. Like you have economies of scales that develop, right? That just allow you to do things cheaper than a new entrant, right? You have more reach, you have brand, right? Like there are things that happen just in like a natural economic system that just create advantages for scale. And in some markets, that wins out. And so I think the idea that like centralization is like a bad thing that's only created through like some sort of government entity and things like that, I think is a misconception. And so, like you said, I think things need to be like analyzed on a case by case basis, right? Like whether someone's centralizing because they want to rug you, essentially, right? Or someone's centralizing for like a real reason, right? Like a real market reason. And I think like defending that and really like explaining the difference between the two is pretty important and can sometimes like uh, go the wrong way, right? Or the messaging can be off sometimes. But I guess what I'm trying to say is like it's okay to be centralized. I think what's more important is that you be transparent. I think that's what people actually want. Like I don't think people mind that some like there's some concentration of power as long as they know like what are the implications of that,
Mm.
and what are like the things that can happen because of that. Um, yeah,
Yeah, no,
I'll pause there.
I agree. I think like for a lot of people, like you say, it's maybe what they want is transparency. Um, Obviously there is a side to it where, despite even the transparent nature of something, if there is a sort of control mechanism, it's able to be like co-opted, right? So then I think that's where transparency, I guess, is less important, and you would weight, the sort of decentralization of the decentralization of power, essentially. You would weight that a little more, because yeah, obviously, like it's okay if you can see what someone's doing, um, but all it takes is like a bad actor to get the helm of said project or your own said database, and then if they want to do something nefarious, then you kind of screwed. However transparent they are, you can't, like, once the damage is done. But anyway, I want to get back to what you were saying about sort of drug development, when you were saying like maybe we can talk about that later. Yeah, maybe would you like to talk a little bit about the drug development side of stuff in the future?
Yeah. So I think yeah, the way drugs are created today. I think I don't know what I mentioned previously, but essentially you start off with thousands of compounds. You run them on like a simulator. You get to a couple hundreds. You have your chemists make them. Once they make them, you test them in mice. Few don't work. You test them in rats. Maybe some of the rats die. Those don't work. They're too toxic, right? You get to like larger mammal studies, and you get to ape studies, and then you go to human trials, right? And all this stuff happens, and you filter to like a lead candidate from like thousands. You have one, and that goes into phase one. the likelihood of that becoming a drug at the end of it is like less than 7%, right? So even after all this filtering, you have one lead candidate, 7% shot, it becomes a drug. And so that's how medicines are created today. And as a result of that, the way medicines work on a population is also like completely, it falls like a bell curve, right? Like every other sort of natural, I guess, or natural way that things shake out in like probabilistic fashion. Like when a drug works, it really only works well for like a subsection of people. And the example I was giving, we were talking about this before the podcast. When they say a drug will work 70% of the time, what that actually means is that a drug will work really well the way it's supposed to and the way you think about it working 40% of the time. It'll work kind of well for 30% of people. Maybe for 20% of people, it won't work at all. It just won't do anything. For like 8 to 9% of people, it'll be slightly bad. So they should get off it as soon as possible. And for like that last 1 to 2%, like it could be really devastating for them. Like the consequences of taking that drug could be bad. And I mean, you hear about this stuff all the time where someone goes in, they take medication, the medication makes it worse, right? And that's because, like if the doctor isn't like a bad doctor. Like when the doctor sees a patient, like the information they have is like this drug works 70% of the time. If I don't give them this drug, the alternative is not giving them this drug. And that's terrible for the patient. So I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to give them this drug, see what happens, maybe potentially switch them off, maybe adjust the dosage, whatever that means, right? But that's the doctor's job. So you have this asset that's really not, it's designed quote unquote for everyone, but it's really like just came like randomly, right? You randomly tested it and you got it. You know how it works kind of like mechanistically a little bit, you know how it works. But most of that's just tested. The doctor's job is to understand you, understand your body, and then figure out if that drug's right for you. But that's only really possible with data and information. Like I think most Americans that have gone to the doctor, like the doctor doesn't spend more than 20 minutes with you, right? Like that's a good day where you got a lot of time with the doctor, right? I've heard of doctors in an 8-hour shift seeing like 40 patients. That's not unheard of, right? And so that, like, you do the math on that, let's say like 40 patients, that's what, 20 patients in 4 hours. So every hour they're seeing 5 patients. And we do the math on that, that's 12 minutes. Plus you got to log it into the EHR. They got to take notes. They got to take bathroom breaks. They got to take lunch. They're spending like 5 to 10 minutes with a patient. The likelihood that doctor gets all the information about you to make an educated decision on like how your disease works, how the mechanism of that drug works, and then deliver it to you in the right way. I mean, it's just not going to happen. You can be the best doctor in the world. You're not doing that, right? You could maybe do that if you had like 4 hours and a bunch of data, right? Or maybe that's too long, but yeah, you need like an hour or two at least, right? To sit through someone's file, look at what's going on, look at their genome, look at their proteomes, like figure out like, how does this disease work? Like, how am I actually helping this person? How does the medication I'm giving them work? What's the interplay between that, right? Like you need data, you need AI, you need computers to make that decision. But, just the way medicine's been done, a doctor has to sit there and, they don't have the tools to make that decision. And so with Health Exchange, we sort of want to do 2 things. One is actually create better drugs. We have these drugs that like kind of work okay for like everyone, but what we want to do is shift that more to like a risk stratified model where, to be eligible for this drug, there's certain things that need to be true about you. Like, for example, your genes have to have like this mutation in a certain way, or like your protein levels need to be high. But if those things are true, this drug will work like not 70% of the time. If those things are true, this drug will work like 98% of the time, right? And so the idea is you get better outcomes because you've created a better drug and you've created like more boundaries on when and where the drug is going to be used. So it's much more precise. It's not just like throw like ibuprofen at the patient and then see what happens, or throw antibiotics and see what happens. It's more like we know exactly what's going on and this is going to solve it in this way, right? So I think that's really the vision we're aiming towards. And, that's also very valuable, right? Like in an economic perspective, right? You are essentially like curing a disease. So there's less costs 10 years from now. And so an insurance company, for example, would pay for that drug, would pay a lot more for that drug than another drug that works kind of okay, right? Because essentially like for them, it's a risk argument like everything else. It's if I give them this drug that works 98% of the time and they check all the boxes, then I have to pay less on their healthcare, right? Than if I have to give them another drug, because I've given the other drug over like a pool of 10,000 patients. Some of them aren't going to work. Some are going to drop off. They're going to go back to the hospital, and that doctor's going to charge me, the insurance company, again. I don't want that, right? Like I want to get this like done quickly, cost effectively. So I would rather use the more effective drug, even have to pay a little bit more, right? Because essentially I still save money in the long run. And so, yeah, I mean, the idea is these drugs would be better for the people who are taking them, and it would save money for the system because it's actually working, right? There aren't these like off-target, like inactive drugs. So yeah, I'll pause there again, but like this is like the vision that we have for the future, where we're really tailoring medications and recommendations based on a person's data, and we're also generating the drugs that can be used in the future once you actually like figure out who needs what.
Unchecked governments have eradicated privacy and truth. Those who resist are brought down swiftly, but we refuse to submit. Lunapunks are freedom fighters, protected by encrypted shadows. The future we're building is sovereign and uncensorable. The moonlit night is coming.
LunarDAO is an investment fund based on Lunapunk philosophy. Sovereign individuals assemble squad wealth to leverage collective strength, become investors, and allocate funds into privacy projects and anonymity tooling, building a portfolio of supported privacy assets. By this, LunarDAO supports the developing teams, expands freedom and crypto sovereignty, and captures value in the upcoming privacy cycle. Any member can exit the squad at any time. Members are anonymous, hence can build Lunapunk vision without fear of frozen funds, legal implications, or any kind of repression. LunarDAO aims to move to a full Anon setup and expand the Lunapunk forest of encryption, a sanctuary where society can redefine itself, self-administrate and regain its economic, political, and moral agency. LunarDAO also supports research on privacy technologies, listed in the wiki at wiki.lunardao.net, and educational structures such as Adalin Academy at adalinacademy.org, where people can acquire knowledge and master skills in programming and economy while developing a philosophical frame to generate the future path of the Lunapunk ecosystem. The launch is coming soon. Stay tuned and follow Lunapunk Squad on Twitter. Yeah, I mean, and I guess because you've got the data, I suppose it would depend on how up to date the data is, and also what kinds of data you have access to. So I'm just kind of thinking that like there's sort of like a chance for you to be able to see that even like sort of see that certain drugs actually don't work as well as you think they do. So obviously, you know, you have drug and then you have like the intended effect, and you have, you know, you've had people study it, but then let's say if you got, you know, let's just say you had 1 million users, let's say, and the data that you had access to gave you the most up-to-date medication that this person was on. And then let's just say, you know, you have like 100,000 people on this one drug, and because you're getting this kind of like feedback system, and you're seeing, well, actually, like these people are getting maybe sicker, or they've got this, you know, whatever marker it is, they've got this sort of marker of something, and you can see from the data that actually it's not working for this person, and I guess so. Yeah, like you were saying, you can make these drugs stronger, again, in a sense, or like more. You can just make the whole kind of process of like administering drugs and choosing the right drug and everything. You can just make it a lot more efficient, a lot more effective. So that, I think that's like a really interesting side of it. So I guess I'm curious, at least like how do you envision the sort of feedback loop of the data? So like let's just say, for example, I was to use Health Exchange, right? how often, I guess, is data collected? Are you aiming for it to be, at least in the future, you know, the 10-year plan, like almost like real time or as close to real time? Like how does that kind of part of it work?
Yeah, so in the beginning, it won't be real time, right? Because we have to pay like API costs and like to actually go in and withdraw this data. So for now, it's going to be a snapshot. But I mean, usually those snapshots are enough where you can do things like recruit for clinical trials, for example. That's a great use case for like non real time data. In the future, yeah, we want to be as real time as possible. And actually, we've planned for this in our tokenomics, right? So it's not going to be like a one and done payment. We're going to have like halvings where, you know, contributors make less over time. But if you're actively contributing your data, you're going to get paid every 6 months, right? The rate's going to decrease as more and more people join the network. It's like all that sort of traditional things that'll happen to rewards happen like on our platform as well. But I mean, that's how we've designed it, right? So that you essentially are an ongoing partner, like forever. One thing we're actually considering is, instead of being for the rest of your life, it's just being like forever, essentially, right? Because there's ways we can, you know, if we keep having at certain like marked amounts, the payouts will be lower and lower, but we'll never hit our cap, right? Because we just keep having it. And so we think we can like create a system where actually you're getting paid out forever, and you can transfer that to your children, right? Or whoever you want to as part of your will. And the idea is if we have like folks, for example, with brain tumors and I think glioblastoma is a great case. Like the prognosis on that isn't that good, right? Like the 5-year survival rate is quite low. However, the data that those patients generate very valuable for future generations, right? Because we can figure out what's causing their cancer, right? What are the mutations that are happening? Even if they don't get to receive like the actual drugs that come out of it, future generations do benefit. And so we were thinking like, hey, like how about for these patients, we give them this constant stream of income, except instead of going to them, it now like transfers to their children, you know, like unfortunately, like their families are affected by this. There might as well be like a silver lining a little bit, right? Where their data is going for sort of the greater good, and they're getting paid for it at a fair price.
No, that's really cool. I guess maybe in some ways that we can get into. I'm not going to like go too deep into this, but I'm just thinking of like the philosophical implications of what you just said, and like in some way I guess you have to call it like IP of a person's genome. I guess you could in some way argue that the person that like comes after them is in some way like they also like they have that same you know, DNA, or they have like some, you know, very similar DNA, and so do they kind of have a right to that because they are actually they're not I don't really know how to put it, but yeah, do you see what I'm saying? In some ways,
Yeah.
like it is their ancestry, and it is and like objectively, like we share the same DNA, and so like yeah, is it like I wonder if you could kind of argue that like people do deserve to be paid for like their grandma's data, not just because it's the grandma, but because like actually when you like put it on the sort of like chopping board and you look at the raw data, it's like this is so similar that it's basically like their intellectual property almost. Like you could argue that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the legality of all that, to be honest. Like
Yeah.
it's sort of over outside of my expertise, but I think it's definitely fair. It seems fair to me, even if it's not indefinite. If it's like, you know, 30 years after they're passing or 40 years after they're passing, you still get paid out. Like I don't know what that number is, and obviously we're still designing these things, open to feedback. But you know, it just seems fair that if someone is really sick with something and they donated their data, right? Like I'm keeping this purely at the individual level, like much like I'm not really thinking about, you know, like your kids or inheritance or anything like that, but just at like a basic like concept of fairness. I've donated my data. I didn't have to, but I did. That data got used, and now it's creating like I don't know, $1 billion drug. I get a cut of that. Unfortunately, that happens 20 years in the future, and I'm already dead, right? Like, and so I think it's fair that if I don't get it, I can choose who gets it, right? Like that, it just seems like a fundamentally a fair thing. If I'm starting with the assumption that people own their health data and they're sort of what's the word? They're owed almost, right? Like certain compensation for that. Like if they pass, then they should just be able to sort of say who their next of kin is, and then that payment goes to them. That just seems fair to me. But I think that was more the angle I came from, much less like a legal, like you actually are related to that person, so you own it. Like I don't know about the legality of that, but just it comes down to fairness, I think, for me.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's also I guess in a way kind of mirrors the ethos of things like NFTs. You hear people talking about royalties and things, and it's just a trying to make the existing systems or build alternative systems that are fairer than what's already out there. And so I think definitely I would agree. Like at least it should be considered. There should be some consideration, like you obviously are doing. Yeah, I think that's important. I guess my next question would be, what are some sort of examples of these kind of systems that but that are already sort of successful? It doesn't have to be in the crypto space or anything like that. It could be, is there like completely non-crypto centralized version? Like how do these work, and like what are some, do you have any like good examples that I don't know, that maybe you take inspiration from?
Yeah, so it definitely took a lot. I take inspiration from a lot of actually projects in the crypto space. So this was tried a few times. The first people to try it, I believe, was a company called Nebula Genomics in 2017. Now you have a few more companies doing something similar to this. I think Genomes.io is they're doing like a purely genetic play. Data Lake is another one. I believe they're headquartered in Poland, and they're sort of backed by like an EU Commission for Innovation, and they're doing something similar in Poland at first. I think there's also another company in California called Luna DNA, and they are also doing something similar. They spun out of a company called Illumina, which basically makes like all the sequencers on the planet. But the way they're doing payouts is like shares of a public benefit corporations. And so it's a little bit illiquid. It's unclear like how you derive value on the back end as a user, or how much value you derive. But these things exist. But these are also niche companies. Like for the most part, the way this has been done in the past and the way it continues to be done is just like you kind of, these companies just take advantage of people's ignorance that these things are going on and just sort of sneak it, right? Like there's a little clause for HIPAA, and then they have your data, right? Like it's all done at that like business to business level. No one's going and asking patients like, hey, would you like to do this? In the cases that they are, it's usually like a nonprofit for cancer, for example. Like, you're a cancer patient, would you like to donate your cancer to this registry, right? And so, at least at scale, I don't think there's a solution out there that really pays people for their individual contributions. There are some companies that exist. Obviously, we think we're better, right? But any company would say that. But I will say that the things we're focused on that we think will allow us to succeed here is a few things. One, we want to make it really easy for our users, right? Like getting your data in one place, like all this stuff. Like sometimes with some of these platforms, it can take a long time. We want to get that down to like 5-10 minutes, right? So like your signups just quick, right? It's like signing up for something online, like a new e-commerce account or something like that, right? So we're trying to make that as efficient and streamlined as possible. So users don't have to go and call people and just drop off during that sort of.
Could that be done potentially with some of these like advances recently with decentralized identity? Could that be done with that, or is that sort of the identity part of like logging in and stuff and verifying that kind of has to be done outside of crypto?
Yeah, that's the part that has to be done outside crypto, because I think then we get into like identifiable.
Unless Polygon like does some deal with
Yeah.
the government or whatever, and they're like, yeah, we're using Polygon blockchain now to do healthcare ID,
For
like
medical
social
data, yeah,
security
I mean, that'd
numbers
be
and stuff.
awesome, right?
Yeah. I mean,
But I
you
think,
never know. You never know. It could happen. You never know.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, that would be welcome news for us, right? But at least for
Yeah, because
now,
that'd
like,
just be
yeah,
Connect Wallet. Like you say, the
be
experience
done.
would be,
Yeah.
everyone's already got the MetaMask. Boom, connect. It's done. Yeah, sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead. I did interrupt you there.
Oh, no. I mean, I think that would be awesome, but unfortunately, right now we have to essentially use like Web2 providers to actually access these data sets. So, but we're working on that integration on the back end, right? We want to make this really easy. The second thing is there's no like activity-based payment. You're going to get paid regardless. You can log in whenever you want. Of course, like for people who log in more often, they'll probably get surfaced like more offers for clinical trials or some other sort of service based on what they need or what they're logging in for. But like another, or we only talked about the clinical trial recruitment as like the near term, I guess, pathway to generate value or money for our users. But there's a few more. There's one around copay cards and financial assistance. So, for example, since there's a lot of private insurers in the United States, some people have like copays, which is like money they have to pay out of pocket on top of what the insurance already covers for them. But a pharma company, right? A lot of the money for a drug goes into R&D. That 7% rate, only 7% of drugs work. So billions get spent on R&D. Actually making the drug, once you have it, pretty cheap, right? But all that cost is front loaded. So if someone drops off of the pharma company's drug because their prices are too high, a lot of these pharma companies will actually like just pay your piece for you, right? Or just give you a card that says you don't have to pay the copay, right? We'll still give you the drug because they still get money from the insurance, right? The money from the insurance it'll only be like $200, $300, but the drug only costs like $5, $10 to make. So it's still like net positive for them to just get paid from insurance, even if you're not paying your copay. So there are these like economic like assistance programs and cash programs that are actually not that well known because like I think people have it in their ideas like pharma's a bad guy. I think pharma, like any other company, works for incentives and money, right? And so if it makes sense to them, they'll do it. And in a lot of situations, people can get like reduced costs for their drugs by directly dealing with the manufacturer rather than going through a hospital and insurance and all this other stuff. And so we can surface those offers to our patients, right? And the pharma company's happy because essentially that's like advertising for their drug, right? Like you would have come off the drug, but rather you got this coupon that says you don't have to pay $100, you have to pay $0, and now you stay on the drug for like another year. So that's another year of revenue for the pharma company. They'll pay for that. They'll pay a lot for that, right? It's very targeted, and we'll make that money. Health Exchange will make that deal with pharma, right? So our users actually get cheaper drugs. We're also getting paid, and so we can pay out a portion of that to our users as well. So basically, you're getting paid to lower your your drug bill, which is like some neat things you can do if you know what's going on at the incentive side of like both pharma and what's happening with patients at the ground level. So there's some really interesting things we can do there. I mean, the other obvious one is like drug advertisements, right? Like you see all that on like these banner ads on the side. Like, hey, we could do something like that. I mean, we have to check into the legality of that because we're targeting data and all that. But I think those are definitely some exciting things we can do that can generate real value, both for our users and for like ourselves as a company, and effectively our users again, because when we make money, our users make money, right?
Okay. Well, we're coming up to almost at the hour here. So I just want to ask kind of a general question about DeSci. So I just asked you, like what are some maybe examples of like other people in the space that's kind of have a similar thing that they're trying to create or an existing thing. And so I guess I'm wondering what kind of stuff do you see in DeSci that excites you? What are there any like cool projects? Like maybe it doesn't have to be related to Health Exchange or like the kind of what you're doing there with data and things. Maybe just it could be anything. I've heard of like HyperCert, and there's like did a podcast with DSci World, and we talked about the Internet of Things devices. There's this idea where like lab equipment's connected to the internet, and so you can like get really granular on like even where the sort of like materials have come from that make up the lab equipment and things like that, just to make sure there's not like any impurity, like, you know, for things like test tubes, there might be some impurities in the glass, you know, like things like that. And that can, affect the experiments and affect the data. So yeah, what kind of, what excites you in D-side? Is there any like interesting projects right now you've got your eye on?
So, I mean, I love the guys over at DSci World. I think they're doing an awesome job. I actually think we met on one of the Twitter spaces they ran. I think, like, honestly, there's a lot of DAOs out there doing some interesting stuff. There's a small one called MedDAO that they're sort of growing slowly, but they're essentially creating like a medical credentialing platform on chain to prove that someone's a doctor, like on chain, essentially. And the things you could potentially do with that is, I mean, doctors could sort of start giving their opinions on certain things, and not medical opinions, right? More like as an industry or a key opinion leader. But down the line, it actually could potentially turn into like a decentralized collective of doctors potentially seeing patients. I don't know how that would work, right? But that's like way in the future. I don't think that's their mission even. I think their mission, I'm not sure what their mission is, but for now they're focused on like credentialing doctors. And I think that's really cool where that could go. At a more philosophical level, like I think people have known like scientific publishing has been broken for quite some time now, right? People just churn out some random crap, honestly, like to get their PhDs. And I mean, they kind of have to, right? That's just the way, like you don't graduate unless you have a paper. And so like the quality and not just like PhD graduates, right? Like if you're at an institution and you want funding, you're just going to churn out papers, right? Because that determines how much grant money you get the next year. And so with all those incentives, like people have gone back and tried to reproduce scientific studies and they just don't work. And so like so much of science, right, of our scientific body of knowledge is junk. Like you don't know what's crap and what's good. Because when you go back and you repeat the experiment like 2-3 times, like, oh wait, it doesn't work. It was just some random thing that this person like cherry picked to get published, essentially. And yeah, I mean, the numbers are actually pretty bad. Like, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's like, I think it's below 50, but it's in like the high 30s, 40s. Like that's what I remember seeing. Like that many experiments are not reproducible. And so I think that has to change, right? Like people need to believe in science. Like it's supposed to be like the great arbiter of truth, right? Like science is supposed to be that way, and it's not. And we see it's not because of incentives. And so I think anyone working in that space, like hats off to them. I don't know how you'd even start, to be honest. Like, how do you define what's true? That's like a really, really hard problem. Can you crowdsource it? Like kind of. Only a few scientists probably know what's going on and like have enough information to do that. So then do you start credentialing people? If you do that, you just go back to the system we're in. That's what we do, right? Like we just look at experts and say like, all right, whatever they say goes, right? But I mean, how do you do that in like a or you have to reproducibly get to the truth, kind of mixing crowdsourcing and this like expertise-based stuff. Like, I don't even know how you do that, to be honest. The problem is science isn't reproducible. How do we make it reproducible? It's like, I have no idea, right?
Yeah, and I think obviously there's problems like you can't do it post, like based on sort of like when you were saying about giving your opinions, and then how do you like get the credentials and stuff, and then are we going back to just how it was done before? Like yeah, I could like it's hard to like you have to sort of you have to sort of make sure up front that those credentials are legitimate. It's not like you could do that in the future based on reputation, because that's extremely dangerous. It's not like an Amazon rating system where it's like, oh, this guy's a top seller because he sold 100. Like you can't just let some random dude give out 100 like to 100 people his medical opinions and then after the fact be like, oh yeah, what he said actually worked, and all these people give the feedback and like, okay, now you're like verified doctor or whatever, you're a good doctor. I mean, maybe there's I've seen is it Kleros? Have you heard of Kleros before? It's like decentralized justice, basically. So it's like I think I don't know that much about it. I just remember hearing about it like maybe like 2 years ago now. And that's kind of like I think like a reputation based thing. And I guess I'm just wondering if did you say MedDAO? Was it MedDAO that doing the credential? Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just wondering if there's any not a connection, but if any inspiration could be taken from things like Kleros, where they're trying to do something where you obviously need credentials, and it's a very serious, important problem, and it's not, you have to be you have to be on the mark, like as it said, like you can't just like guess at like, is this person a good doctor, or same with like, is this person a good judge, or is this juror biased in some way, or are they fit to be a juror or whatever. But yeah, they're trying to do something. In
shout out to one other small DAX. There's a DAO out there called Algovera AI, and they actually awarded us a grant for working on this project. But they give out grants, I think 10 grants a month to AI projects in the space, and it's sort of like a decentralized funding model, right? Where they're just trying to get more sort of AI happening in this space. So Algovera, if you haven't heard of them, definitely check them out as well. And then DeSci World, I think we mentioned them in passing, but DeSci World is sort of this like the aggregator website. So if you're interested in DeSci, like that's the place you go to, just because it has a list of every single DeSci project going on. I think we're on it. Algovera's on it, right? I think Molecule, BioDAO, HairDAO, Athena DAO, like they're all sort of listed on DeSci World. So I think DeSci World is doing a good job of just like aggregating everything and just drawing just general interest to the space. So I like them as well. So you asked me for who's interesting. I think MedDAO is doing some cool stuff. DeSci World is doing some cool stuff. Algovera is also doing some great stuff on more. It's less about like bio or like hard sciences. It's more specifically focused on AI, which I mean, it's probably a science now too, right? Like,
So yeah, and I think on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, if you want, you can have the floor. If there's, do you think we've missed anything? Is there anything that you think is important to get out there? Like anything at all? What is there? Anything? Any sort of like final, closing words?
I think that's pretty much it. At the end of the day, like the reason I started Health Exchange, like I've worked with pharma companies, with sort of life science companies, and I've also worked in a lab. So like the what really led me and my co-founder to starting Health Exchange was this idea that there's a huge market, we can really meaningfully make a dent in medicine, and we can do it while paying our users, right? Like, so we think it's like sort of like a beautiful system in that sense where everybody wins, right? Like we can create something that will meaningfully impact patient lives. We can pay our users. We can be a partner to pharmaceutical companies, right? And so we see ourselves really as this like negotiator or mediator that can really get things done. But at the end of the day, we're only as powerful as our users let us be, right? The more users we have, the more power we have as a company. But I guess other than that, Health Exchange, it's spelled without the E, so it's just Health Exchange. You can follow us on Twitter. I think it's health_exchange without the E again. And feel free to drop by our Discord. But mainly we stay active on Twitter. But yeah, we'll be launching our products soon. We'll put out announcements on there. But thanks again for having me on the podcast, Yves. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, not a problem. I've really enjoyed this. I think people are going to learn a lot. I definitely learned a lot, and I have done in the past, like in the in the spaces and things. Well, especially the one the other day. So like for example, the thing about the 1 in 3 Americans, the little factoid. I was like, wow, that's like pretty shocking. Like I think people need to hear about that. And in fact, on this podcast, you said it's actually worse than that. Yeah. So yeah, no, I've really enjoyed this. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on. everyone, you need to check out Health Exchange. I'm going to put all the links in the description. Obviously, the Twitter. If you got, do you have you obviously have a website? Do you have like any other kind of websites or anything that you want to point people to?
Just our Twitter and Discord. Honestly, our website, we're doing a little bit of a revamp, so you could join the you can create an account and you'll be updated. But we recommend right now just Twitter and Discord. But soon we'll have a revamped website. We'll have a mailing list, everything set up in the next few months. So,
okay,
yeah,
Twitter, Discord, website will all be in the description. Check it out. Hari from Health Exchange. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. You guys know what to do. If you have any comments, put them down there. Like, subscribe, notification bell, all that good stuff. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.